The Stone Zone, with legendary Republican strategist and political icon and pundit Roger Stone. Stone has served as a senior campaign aide to 3 Republican presidents. He is a New York Times best-selling author and a longtime friend and advisor of President Donald Trump. As an outspoken libertarian, Stone has appeared on thousands of broadcasts, spoken at countless venues, and lectured before the prestigious Oxford Political Union and the Cambridge Union Society. Due to his 4+ decades in the political and cultural arena, Stone has become a pop culture icon. And now, here's your host, Roger Stone.
Welcome, I'm Roger Stone. In a lightning attack, the regime of al-Assad in Syria has fallen. Here to discuss the geopolitical and international implications of this, first, my co-host, the editor-in-chief of the Illinois Review, Mark Vargas.
Good to be with you, Roger.
Let's go right to our guest. I can't think of anyone on the planet who better understands the implications of these developments than our good friend, former National Security Advisor, General Michael Flynn, America's general.
Thank you so much, Roger, and I appreciate you allowing me to come on with your great audience mobile. I'm in my mobile command post, going driving over to Palm Beach and Mar-a-Lago here for the next couple of days.
I appreciate your joining us from the road. Very much appreciated. We have a 2.5-minute clip here that kind of sets the table. Let's roll that.
Gunshots rang out in celebration across Syria's capital on Sunday as rebel forces declared they had seized control of Damascus and thrown out President Bashar al-Assad. That spells an end to the Assad family's iron-fisted rule and comes after more than 13 years of civil war in a seismic moment for the Middle East. After mounting a sudden advance a week ago, the rebels on Sunday announced on state TV that they had toppled the president, calling him a tyrant. The Syrian rebel coalition said in a statement it was working to complete the transfer of power to a transitional governing body with full executive powers. It added that, quote, "The Great Syrian Revolution has moved from the stage of struggle to overthrow the Assad regime to the struggle to build a Syria together that befits the sacrifices of its people." Assad, who had crushed all forms of dissent, flew out of Damascus for an unknown destination early on Sunday, according to army sources. Russia's foreign ministry later said in a statement Assad had left the country after giving orders for a peaceful handover of power. As people celebrated the government's collapse in cities such as Aleppo, Syrian Prime Minister Mohammed Ghazi al-Jalali said he had been in contact with rebel commander Abu Muhammad al-Golani to discuss managing the transitional period. That marks a notable development in efforts to shape Syria's political future. The Prime Minister also called for free elections so Syrians can choose the leaders they want. But that would require a smooth transition in a country with complex competing interests from Islamists to groups linked to the United States, Russia and Turkey. Assad's ouster is a major blow to the influence of Russia and Iran in the region. They were key allies who propped him up in the long-running conflict's critical moments. The pace of events has stunned Arab capitals and raised fears of a new wave of regional instability. It marks a turning point for Syria, shattered by years of war that has killed hundreds of thousands of people. It has also forced millions abroad as refugees, many of them seen cheering on Sunday on the streets of their adopted homes from Lebanon to Germany. Western governments have long shunned the Assad-led state, but now they have to decide how to deal with a new administration that looks set to be influenced by a group globally labeled as terrorists. Led by the commander Golani, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, is Syria's strongest rebel group. It used to be an al-Qaeda affiliate, and some Syrians are worried that it will impose draconian Islamist rule.
All right, as always, everything is not as it appears, and this situation is one that is extraordinarily complex. The last time this happened, CIA-backed insurgents made horrific gains in Syria, which ended up in the mass slaughter of hundreds of thousands of Christians, including crucifixion of children as young as 5. General, I fear that that is coming again. You are the one man who can probably put all of this complicated question into context. So what has really transpired here, General Flynn?
Yeah, so let's go from the 100,000-foot level and walk our way down to the ground. I think what this demonstrates, and for the entirety of the Middle Eastern region, and the region that extends actually out to East Africa and clearly over to Central Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, the Tajikistan. I mean, all of the Central Asian republics north of Afghanistan. So the wider trans region is impacted by the collapse of the Assad regime, and the relationships and alliances between the former Syrian regime, Russia, China, Iran, are all at risk right now in terms of how those alliances stick together. And I think, and in fact, I know that there are clear connections between what is happening in Eastern Europe with the war between Ukraine and Russia, as well as what is happening down in the Middle East right now. So, certainly a new stage. Clearly, the beginning of this was really started by Hamas on the 7th of October, well over a year ago now. So the consequence of that action, which was really driven by the Iranian dictatorship, has caused this result. And at no time that I'm aware of, that I've studied, and certainly in recent history, being probably the last 50 to 75 years, when a Islamist group has taken over a nation, it did not transcend into a burgeoning democracy. So we have to be on our toes here. Down another level, guys, and to your audience, I think when there was an article today or yesterday that I read, and it really had to do with, who won this war? Did the Pentagon win it, or did the CIA win it? Whose side, who was on which side? And I do believe that America and the American, the pathetic leadership right now that we have in our foreign policy community, particularly though that emanating from the White House, has been completely 100% wrong in their projections and in their predictions for what was going to transpire here on the ground. So what we have is a new Middle East taking shape. I think the next big brick for everybody to be watching to potentially fall, and this is all going to depend on outside Iranian leaders who want to see the Khomeini regime collapse, and where do they position themselves geographically, ideologically, politically, and from a leadership perspective, because I think that Iran is really the next domino here to fall, so to speak, or the next brick to collapse. All the other leaders in the region are going to also, all the other Arab leaders in the region are also going to be on high alert, because what this means is that the rebel forces inside of the Middle East are starting to get a strength to them, and this emerging leader that is in Syria right now, what he will have to demonstrate is his ability to control some of the consequences of these various groups inside of Syria. And I know that we still have the United States of America still has a lot of resources. CENTCOM, Central Command out of Tampa, which has that region under its belt, was involved in some of the operations over the last couple of days, last 96 hours. So there's so much at stake right now, and it's clearly not done. And I do believe that the beginning of this really was the dictatorship of Iran trying to determine the outcome of a region that they really had no business getting involved in the way they got involved in, with their various groups of Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthi rebels down south in Yemen, and then their own actions. And those actions have had this particular consequence, and this consequence is very, very dangerous. And last comment that I'd make on this, Roger, is the consequences of this latest fall of Assad will impact the incoming Trump administration in ways that they may not be able to control, that they're going to have to weigh in. And I know I've seen some of the comments from President Trump already, It's like you don't want war, but war wants you. And that's kind of where we are right now. If we're not smart about the continuation of this transition of power here in the United States of America, we could find ourselves in a much greater civil war in the Middle East and a nuclear war in Eastern Europe. So let me stop there and take a pause and see what questions you might have.
You raised. Let me take a quick stab here, Mark. As you're correct, General Flynn. President Trump has said in various social media postings that he does not think the United States should get involved, that this is really Russia's problem, and that Russia's use for Syria has really run out. Yet we learned yesterday that the United States Central Command launched a series of precision airstrikes against ISIS in central Syria yesterday. That operation, allegedly targeting key ISIS camps and operatives, comes at a critical juncture as the regime is collapsing. So CENTCOM's operation hit over 75 strategic targets using a formidable arsenal, including B-52 bombers, F-15 fighter jets, and A-10 close air support aircraft. If we're staying out of this, why are we bombing Syria?
Yeah. So, and this tells you everything you need to know about the direction of the foreign policy at the tail end of a lame duck administration that has absolutely destroyed our leadership around the world, not just in this region. So, this tactical military targeting of these a lot of weapons depots, a lot of capabilities that the Syrian military had, airfields and aircraft, and I understand a couple of chemical depots were destroyed. Destroying those are fine. Those are things that should have been done by maybe Israel or maybe the others who are in support there. But for the U.S. to get directly involved in this, obviously these are decisions that are coming out of the current administration. CENTCOM is not operating in a vacuum and making or taking these decisions on their own. They're doing them based on direction from the National Security Council, led by President Biden, who should be the type, he should be the one making these decisions. But we really don't know who's in charge of our government right now, who's in charge of the White House right now. And so that's why I said earlier that the consequences of what we are involved in and how we will have to either disengage or how we shape our footprint in the region, further shape the U.S. footprint in the region, is unknown right now. The fact that we are taking tactical and strategic targeting actions and operations means that we are fully involved in this war. We have chosen a side. The side that we have chosen, like I said earlier, I was not kidding about the article that I thought was a real good piece of analysis about who's winning the war. Is the Pentagon or the CIA winning the war? And the Pentagon, of course, would be organizations like CENTCOM and some of the operations they're doing. Special operations is deeply involved there, the special operations community, but also the CIA, and the CIA's emboldening some of these radical Islamist groups that we have known about for well over a decade, if not longer. In the likes of the defeat of Al Qaeda, but then the rise of ISIS and some of these other Islamist groups. And you have to wonder at the end of the day who's actually behind all this. And this is why I firmly believe this, that the outgoing administration is doing everything that it can to disrupt the incoming administration's agenda, which is focused primarily on a domestic agenda to basically strengthen America first ideals and values, to fix our border problems, to get rid of to deport all of these millions of illegals, to reduce crime, strengthen our economy, get the energy resources in our country going again. That's what we should be. That's what I know Trump and his team want to focus on. But what is happening is at the tail end of this current administration, they are drawing us and dragging us, kicking and screaming into another conflict, a bigger conflict than what has already occurred. So this fall of Assad is not a small thing. To talk about the Christians briefly, probably 10, 15 years ago, the Christian population in Syria was roughly between 15 and 20%. Today, I understand that number is down below 5% because of the Christians that have been either, killed or have had to leave the country and travel, up into like places like Turkey or up into Europe or out of the region completely. So the Christian community that is remaining is at great, great risk. And a lot of this we are going to have to really examine as the Trump administration gets into office. They're going to have to take a hard look at who's behind all this. Who is actually behind all this, and how much of a hand does this current U.S. administration, the current U.S. intelligence community, and the resources that we have, as well as those in the Pentagon, are doing to foment much of this unrest. I'm all for Assad having to leave. The fact that he is claiming asylum in Russia, fine. I actually understand the consequences of what we're going to face, and my next sort of strategic view is really what's going to happen in Iran. And Iran collapses, and we could see a revolt in Iran by the Iranian people. If there was ever a time for them to stand up and do something, now is the time to do it, to take advantage of this unrest and take advantage of this uncertainty and confusion. And God knows what the results of that will be. So this is far from over. The battles that will take place, that will continue to take place well before the Trump administration takes over, are going to present us with some really, really difficult challenges going forward.
All right, Mark, the next question to you.
General Flynn, I was a civilian within OSD and was TDY in Baghdad 14 times from 07 to 10. So I certainly understand the region not as well as you. But it doesn't take a foreign policy or national security expert to see what's happening, and that it appears that the lame duck Biden administration is working very hard and diligently to make sure that when President Trump takes office on January 20th, that the Middle East is in total chaos. Do you see Barack Hussein Obama's fingerprints on this sort of pulling the strings behind the scenes to create as much instability in the Middle East as possible, to make Donald Trump's job that much more difficult on January 20th?
100%, Mark. 100%. The sort of the magician pulling the various tricks right now is him. And that is very clear. You've seen him come out lately here. And the other person that I found of interest that popped up was Eric Holder, his wingman, right? The two wingmen. Very interesting. Like I said before, and this is just common sense. You look at the landscape of the world. You look at the landscape of the United States. You look at what Donald Trump has said he wants to do. And his agenda to try to achieve, to get this country back on track, is clearly an America first agenda, and it goes back to the things I said previously. So the intent, and this is very clear to me, whether people want to believe me or not, this is what I believe. The clear intent here by those that are pulling the strings is to completely, not kind of, but completely disrupt the America First agenda that President Trump is coming into office with, on this mandate victory, both popular vote and electoral vote that he won. And if everything was normal and we had a normal type of transition with people that were reasonable in the White House right now, that were trying to keep us out of war instead of fomenting a deeper conflict, not only in the Middle East but in Eastern Europe, then we wouldn't have to worry. We wouldn't have these problems. But we have these problems because we have a body of people that are they're Marxists in our country right now, that are leading this effort, and they are part of this globalist element. And we have a big problem, and Trump clearly understands it, and he's been very articulate about laying it out. and and again, his recent remarks. But it's like I said, and I don't mean to be tongue in cheek, but you may not want war, but war wants you, and once war is engaged, which it is, and it's engaged in a vastly different way right now in the Middle East, and we're also talking about some increases in Eastern Europe to what's going on. And I haven't even touched on China yet and China's roles and responsibilities. But this is a really dangerous time, and I do think that the Trump administration, the team that he's got, they'll need to stay, have enough people focused on his America First agenda. But he's going to have I kind of would say, like right now, like a wartime cabinet, and however he forms that and organizes that, and he probably personally is going to need to get involved in some conversations between, and it may be where Trump needs to call up Obama and tell him to back off, because I don't think that Joe Biden has all of his faculties, at least not 24 hours a day. And this is a really, really seriously dangerous time. And it's a time in history where we could have, we could come out of this arc of history in the United States here and be a much, much stronger nation with all the things that Donald J. Trump has talked about doing as the 47th president of the United States. But that's the interesting thing about history. History has a way of repeating itself and causing consequences and challenges that are unforeseen. And this one that we have recently experienced here in the Middle East is one of those unforeseen challenges, because I think it happens so rapidly. And frankly, our own foreign policy leadership, the National Security Advisor, current one, and the Secretary of State, as well as the intelligence community, the U.S. intelligence community, none of them predicted this. In fact, they predicted just the opposite. So either they are lying, they're incompetent, or they're fools, and maybe they're in the category of all the above.
Yeah, it seems to me that this is, in a way, very similar to the situation between Ukraine and Russia, where after Trump's election, they expedite the use of these long-range missiles to hit targets deep inside of Russia. They're trying to hand Donald Trump a world on fire, it seems to me. And they're rushing to do it. No. We all saw the video of Anthony Blinken say, our goal now is to get every possible dollar out the door to Ukraine until Trump takes office. They're just trying to hand this guy, an unmitigated international disaster. And I think that's it. Mark, a final question for General Flynn, because he's on the way to all important meetings at Mar-a-Lago.
General Flynn, I just wanted to touch, you mentioned China very briefly, and I wanted you to just sort of expand on that very quickly about what role China has in all of this and the destabilization there in the Middle East. But yeah, interested in your thoughts on that, in China specifically.
Yeah, so China has a direct influence, a direct impact, and they are both an economic and a military resource provider to all of the unrest in the Middle East and certainly in Europe, and that's not just in places like Syria or places like in support of Russia and the operations in eastern Ukraine. They have a direct influence, and they're impacting in many, many ways. Through their influence operations, their information operations, and their intelligence operations, directly, inside of governments, influencing governments that we think we are aligned with. The United States is aligned with. The Chinese are right in the middle of those relationships. The Chinese are also tied closely in with Iran. The Chinese are tied closely in with many of the nations in North Africa and East Africa, and particularly Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Southwest Asia. And so the Chinese are a very, very smart, shrewd geostrategic player in world affairs. And all while this is going on, Mark. Okay, so all while this is going on in the Middle East, and we are going to be distracted by this, whether we like it or not. And it's beyond a distraction. This is real war. And we are going to take our eye potentially off the ball of our own hemisphere. And that's what bothers me, and that's what concerns me the most. When I say our own hemisphere and Chinese influence, I'm talking about the Caribbean, Central America, the Panama Canal, which is one of the most strategic waterways for the United States of America in the world. About 70% of our trade goes through the Panama Canal. And then, of course, other alliances that the Chinese have in South America. So while we're distracted, sadly, with these wars and these major regional conflicts in East Europe and in the Middle East and in the greater trans region of the Middle East, which extends from East Africa over to the Central Asian republics, we have a tendency, the United States has a tendency to take our eye off the ball right here at home. And frankly, that's exactly what the Chinese want. And that's sort of a strategic goal, is to drive wedges between alliances that the United States of America has and needs, and cause us to be distracted by having to expend resources overseas for these unnecessary wars and unnecessary conflicts, all while they're continuing to build a very strong foundation in our own hemisphere. And that includes right here in the United States of America.
All right, we're going to leave it there. General Flynn, thank you for calling us from your mobile command center. We will see you at Mar-a-Lago tomorrow. God bless you, my friend, and Godspeed.
All right. Thanks, Roger. Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate it. God bless.
Thank you.
All right, Mark, this is a complicated question. We got some video here I want to roll. They're already beginning to round up Christians, according to videos we've seen online. This is where I'm most deeply concerned. Let's roll video 2, where you see prisoners all over Syria currently being released by the rebels. Scary, scary stuff. The best explanation I have seen to try to understand what's transpired here was by Jeffrey Sachs, who I believe has just been appointed by President Trump to a position within the U.S. Treasury Department. He was on with Morning Joe. Pretty decent explanation of the role of the Central Intelligence Agency, Obama, and the neocons in this entire conflict. Let's roll that.
How out of control this could escalate.
It's true, but I think we have to step back and not put this in partisan terms. This is a U.S. mistake that started 7 years ago. And I remember the day on your show when President Obama said, Assad must go. And I looked at you and Joe and I said, huh? How's he going to do that? Where's the policy for that?
Right.
And we know they sent in the CIA to overthrow Assad. The CIA and Saudi Arabia together in covert operations tried to overthrow Assad. It was a disaster. Eventually it brought in both ISIS as a splinter group to the jihadists that went in. It also brought in Russia. So we have been digging deeper and deeper and deeper. What we should do now is get out and not continue to throw missiles, not have a confrontation with Russia. 7 years has been a disaster under Obama, continuing under Trump. This is what I would call the permanent state. This is the CIA, this is Pentagon, wanting to keep Iran and Russia out of Syria, but no way to do that. And so we have made a proxy war in Syria. It's killed 500,000 people, displaced 10 million. And I'll say predictably so, because I predicted it 7 years ago that there was no way to do this and that it would make a complete chaos. So what I would plead to President Trump is get out. Like his instinct told him, by the way. That was his instinct. But then all the establishment, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Pentagon, everybody said, no, that's irresponsible. But his instinct is right. Get out. We've done enough damage, 7 years. And now we really risk a confrontation with Russia that is extraordinarily dangerous, reckless.
Extraordinary. Mark, you are somewhat of an expert in this region. You spent a lot of time there in the service of your country in a civilian capacity. What precisely is the role and interest of Israel here in this entire matter?
Yeah, I mean, Israel has a lot at stake. And let's not forget that Syria still has chemical weapons. And that's the fear. We see this with regime changes of very brutal dictators, Roger. There's a history of it. And we could look back at Iraq. And you're right, General Flynn touched on this earlier. It is the Christians that are targeted number one. The numbers are astounding. 1.3 million Christians in Syria. Today, it's estimated at around 250,000. Where did they go? We know that Assad was a brutal dictator and murdered and poisoned his own people. But where did they go? I believe that they were murdered. But Israel has a key stake in this, and Prime Minister Netanyahu understands that, and that's why he's preemptive strikes, and they have to destabilize and go after these chemical plants, because there is no doubt in my mind that we are on the verge of a chemical type war in Syria. But what's interesting is that this is deliberate, and President Trump has talked about his entire political career here since 2015 about he doesn't want to be the president that goes to war. He wants to be the president to end wars. And what we're seeing is an lame duck administration now setting President Trump's administration up for going to war. And the point that General Flynn made about taking money away from the America First policies and having to redirect those into the Middle East, again, is exactly what they're trying to do, is destabilize and force President Trump to take his eye off of making America great again and having to deploy that money into the Middle East to create some stability. But it is an absolute disaster. But I do fear of a chemical type warfare that is going to end in total disaster, rattling the hornet's nest with Iran. What General Flynn just mentioned, the role and the big financial role that China is playing. Roger, this really is a perfect storm being created here in the Middle East.
Yeah, the internal conflict and the historical aspect of this, I think, are vitally important. Here's a video from 2017 in which Julian Assange of WikiLeaks dropped the bombshell that President Trump was at that time involved with the CIA, locked in a fierce internal battle over Syria. Assange revealed that the CIA's number one priority and its biggest budget item at the time was to topple Assad. We know from a Reuters story around this same time that Trump ordered the CIA to cut off aid to the so-called rebels. Let's roll that.
Be aware, but there is a serious conflict between, say, Donald Trump, one of his strategic advisors, Steve Bannon, and other people around them, and the Central Intelligence Agency and some of the other U.S. security agencies. Quite a serious conflict where they are pushing to preserve their power,
right,
and make the president, not change their policies that they want to keep. What's a prime example of that? I think it is the leading cause of this conflict. It is a policy on Syria.
Right.
The budgetary spend, the number one project of the CIA has been the overthrow of the government of Bashar al-Assad, measured by the amount of their budget that they're spending. So they spend more of their budget on that than anything else.
Right.
So Trump has an electoral, during his campaign, a policy of not overthrowing Bashar al-Assad, although I don't think he put it explicitly like that, but cooperating with Assad and the Russians to attack ISIS, which essentially means not overthrowing Bashar al-Assad.
Yeah.
So that's creating enormous problems for the CIA. because not only do they have people that have specialized in doing that and to risen to positions of power within the Central Intelligence Agency for doing that, but they've made extensive connections and alliances with Saudi Arabia, with Qatar, with Turkey, etc., in order to overthrow that government and to support the forces, internal and external, that are trying to achieve.
There's, I think, some important context there. Meanwhile, Israel has announced that they're capturing territory from Syria in the Golan Heights buffer zone. Let's take a look at that.
This is a historic day for the Middle East. The collapse of the Assad regime, the tyranny in Damascus, offers great opportunity, but also is fraught with significant dangers. This collapse is a direct result of our forceful action against Hezbollah and Iran, Assad's main supporters. It set off a chain reaction of all those who want to free themselves from this tyranny and its oppression. But it also means we have to take action against possible threats. One of them is the collapse of the Separation of Forces Agreement from 1974 between Israel and Syria. This agreement held for 50 years. Last night it collapsed. The Syrian army abandoned its positions. We gave the Israeli army the order to take over these positions to ensure that no hostile force embeds itself right next to the border of Israel. This is a temporary defensive position until a suitable arrangement is found. Equally, we send a hand of peace to all those beyond our border in Syria, to the Druze, to the Kurds, to the Christians, and to the Muslims who want to live in peace with Israel. We're going to follow events very carefully. If we can establish neighborly relations and a peaceful relations with the new forces emerging in Syria, that's our desire. But if we do not, we'll do whatever it takes to defend the state of Israel and the border of Israel.
Mark, your analysis of that.
I mean, Prime Minister Netanyahu is spot on. Again, we can't reiterate how brutal the Assad regime was. But again, we need stability in that region because it's going to set off a chain reaction. And so that's why it's so important to continue to stand by our ally Netanyahu, because in a broader sense, in the global war on terrorism, that's why Israel has been such an important and critical ally in the fight against the global war on terrorism. And so, again, I think that this is the strategy to completely destabilize this region is purposeful, but yet what Prime Minister Netanyahu certainly understands is alliances, force, strength. This is what a lot of these brutal dictators and these regimes, they respect strength. And that you can see what's happening here in the U.S. They don't respect weakness. And that's what we've seen from this Biden administration for the last 4 years. But Roger, think about this. The instability that's been created since day one, going all the way back to the withdrawal in Afghanistan and the impact, again, that has set off a chain reaction. Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Hamas, now Syria. It really is remarkable how we've seen this rapid decline in terms of foreign policy and stability in that region in just a matter of less than 4 years.
Really extraordinary. All right, we're going to switch quickly. I'm going to do a quick commercial for my book, and then we'll be back with a domestic political discussion with my good friend Mark Vargas, the editor-in-chief of the Illinois Review. Folks, Christmas is coming up, and if there's a history or political buff in your family, well, I have the perfect gift for them. That would be my New York Times best-selling book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. Many people have said that this is the comprehensive book on the Kennedy assassination because I take into account the involvement of the Central Intelligence Agency, organized crime, Big Texas Oil, the FBI, the Secret Service, but then the ringmaster himself, the drum major for the entire effort, Lyndon Baines Johnson. In this heavily documented and footnoted book, I make the case that LBJ is the man with the most to lose and the most to gain, and that he had the motive, means, and opportunity to kill his predecessor. I use eyewitness evidence, fingerprint evidence, and deep Texas politics to make this comprehensive case. Now, in order to get your book for Christmas, you can go to themanwhokilledkennedy.com, themanwhokilledkennedy.com. By going there, you can get a personally inscribed copy, and we'll get it out the door to you immediately so that you have it by Christmas. So if you, like millions of Americans, still intrigued by the question of who really killed John F. Kennedy and why, let me recommend to you my book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. One more time, we'll put up that address for you. You can order it by going right now to themanwhokilledkennedy.com. That's themanwhokilledkennedy.com. I think this will be a great, great Christmas gift for those in your family who are interested in politics or the news or, well, in this case, just a good murder mystery. All right, Mark, let's come back. President Trump has sent a number of his nominees today. They'll be moving around Capitol Hill, meeting with various Republican senators. Now, normally you would think this is odd because by tradition, a president is given his nominees, particularly when his own party is in the majority. But as of today, it is uncertain that his nominees, such as FBI Director Designee Kash Patel, the National Director of Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, certainly HHS Secretary Robert Kennedy, and others have the votes for confirmation. What do you think's going on here?
It really is the deep state that is trying to thwart President Trump's cabinet picks going against the American people, where President Trump gave a mandate. But Roger, what's interesting, and the discussion that we've had in the first half of the show about foreign policy and national security, the thought of having a Kash Patel at FBI scares the heck out of the deep state. The thought of Tulsi Gabbard, who in July was put on the terrorist watch list by the Biden-Harris administration, and in January she'll be serving as the Director of National Intelligence, overseeing all of the intelligence agencies, including the CIA. What we're seeing is a complete and total disruption of the deep state. And yes, what it's doing is it's bringing to the surface even those Republican senators that are part of that uniparty deep state. But President Trump is committed to supporting these nominees, the American people. If you look at the poll numbers of the American people, they are strong that they support President Trump's nominees. They support his direction for our country. Again, that's why he won this mandate. But this is historical in terms of the attacks that we're seeing on these great candidates for these positions, like Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and so many others. But stand tall, stand strong, and we know that we will get these nominees confirmed.
I think one of the answers here is grassroots action. You saw a situation last week in which the two senators from Oklahoma, James Lankford, who's on the Intelligence Committee and who is a neocon, and Mark Wayne Mullen, a former congressman, now a U.S. senator who won a special election for that seat when James Imhoff retired from the Senate kind of unexpectedly. Now, Mark Wayne is a man who kind of has his foot in both camps. He's okay with the establishment Republicans, yet he was one of the earliest congressmen in the country to endorse Donald Trump. I should say one of the earliest senators. When they both expressed concerns about Kash Patel, Senator Mullen's office was so completely besieged by phone calls and text messages and emails from his constituents who pointed out that Donald Trump carried 77 of all 77 counties in Oklahoma, the only presidential candidate, by the way, in history to do so. Senator Mullen quickly announced that he would be supporting Kash Patel. This is an example to all of our listeners out there that they need to get active. One that I think is very important to target for your messages. And by the way, folks, keep it civil, keep it polite. This is not about shouting. This is about firmly letting your elected officials know where you stand and that they will be held accountable, that this is a process. So if you are Joni Ernst, for example, the senator from Iowa, which voted by 12 points for Donald Trump, she's now thinking about whether she's going to support his nominees. I believe she's also up for election in 2026. Very calmly let her know that if she does not support the president, you will not be supporting her. In fact, you'll be supporting a challenge to her. But again, I stress to you: don't yell, don't raise your voice, don't use curse words. Keep it polite, keep it civil, but keep it firm. This kind of grassroots action right now is crucial. So, if you're a listener of the Stone Zone or a watcher today, go online, find out the phone number for Joni Ernst's offices in Iowa. I guarantee you she has more than one. Find her email address and send her a strong but firmly worded message. I cannot overemphasize how important this kind of grassroots action really is in terms of bringing these recalcitrant Republicans in line.
And Roger, this is part of President Trump's brilliance, is that what he does is he brings to the surface these senators through his nominations and other things. He brings to the surface these senators and puts them on the radar of MAGA and grassroots. And activism does work. I can't reiterate that point enough. Even in a state like Illinois that is dominated by Democratic control, Republican MAGA grassroots activists just recently stopped a bill in Springfield where it wanted to make parents define them as child abusers if they refuse to allow their minor child to get gender reassignment surgery. And the MAGA grassroots activists made noise. They peacefully and calmly called legislative offices, inundated the Illinois state capitol with phone calls, and that bill was pulled. And so again, grassroots activism works, and that's part of the power of the MAGA movement.
Very, very well put. It is incredible to me that some Republicans are misreading this extraordinary mandate, but that seems to be the case. And as General Flynn points out, in the closing minutes of the Biden administration, they're trying to impose their deranged foreign policy on the country, on the world, and leave Donald Trump, a planet on fire, really. We had Barry Habib on my 77 WABC radio show this past weekend talking about the economic mess they're trying to hand Donald Trump. It really is extraordinary. Mark, let me ask you this kind of a closing question. Did you see the president in Paris? There's some great photos of him with Jill Biden, and he used those photos to launch his new line of perfumes and fragrances. So are you going to be giving members of your family Trump fragrances, Trump perfume for Christmas?
I've already gone to the link, and I thought that was beautiful. But, 3 words, Roger, after watching President Trump in Paris this weekend: America is back. I mean, the world leaders, kings and queens and princes, couldn't take their eyes off of him. They followed his every move. They clamored to get close to him and say hello and to shake his hand and congratulate him. Macron even put him right next to him, front and center. And you can see that the Bidens were more irrelevant. But it's thrilling to know that America is back. And I will be giving those, along with your book, Roger, that you just promoted. I'm going to give that as a Christmas gift, but I'm also going to be handing out the Trump perfume and cologne. I love it.
Okay. I want to thank my good friend Mark Vargas for joining us. He'll probably be joining us through the week. Our good friend Troy Smith is on the mend. He's had some issues regarding his back. He's going to be fine, but he sends his regards. And meanwhile, we're going to be asking Mark to pinch hit for him on occasion here. We appreciate him diving in at the last minute. We'll remind folks that you can see the show every day at 4 o'clock Central, 5 o'clock Eastern at worldviewtube.com. But if you're unable to join us then it's very important that you go to the App Store and you download the Rumble app. And when you do so, you follow Roger Stone. It's actually rumble.com/Roger Stone, rumble.com/Roger Stone. You see that little green follow button. Click on the follow button there, and then set yourself a notification so you don't miss any of the show. Thanks for joining us today in the Stone Zone. We've got this short video for you, and then until then, we'll see you tomorrow.
Now to discuss is the man, the myth, and the legend, Roger Stone. Roger, thanks for being here.
Great to be here.
So first of all, I want to get your reaction to the White House's decision just, as I said, 48 hours ago to greenlight these recent strikes. We know with these Attack-M missiles that not only are they U.S. made, but they have to have U.S. operators to be fired. What say you?
Well, Dwight Eisenhower warned us about this. He called it the military-industrial complex. Today, we call it the deep state. It's an amalgamation of unelected bureaucrats deep within the bureaucracy of our government, defense contractors, those in the think tanks. A war, as you know, is extraordinarily profitable for some. The American people have rejected the war mania of the current administration. They have 60 plus days in office. They are intent on trying to ship as many dollars to Ukraine as possible. And now, very clearly, we are edging closer and closer to World War III. You're right, Joe Biden's not making these decisions, but who is? Well, Antony Blinken, our Secretary of State, is the one carrying them out, but he answers to others. I mean, we have a powerful elite in this country who are committed to war, despite the fact the American people spoke overwhelmingly in the most recent election for peace. I don't think we've ever been closer to World War III than we are in this second. I had General Flynn on my own show yesterday. He makes a pretty good case that neither the Ukrainians nor the Russians want World War III. They're being pushed towards it by our State Department. The fact that we don't even have ongoing negotiations, there's no talks going on. Both sides, I think, would like to engage in talks, but that has been vetoed by our State Department. So yes, they're so apoplectic, they're so hysterical about their loss of power. I think they're going to try to start a world war, and I think they're going to try to crash our economy if they can do so as well, to leave Donald Trump to clean up their mess.
It is so beyond the pale to see this happening right now. Trump issued a very strong video statement about it yesterday, saying exactly what you just said, right? We've never been closer to World War III than we are at this moment. But simply the fact that you have, as you rightly said, an overwhelming response by the American people who made their voices heard in this last election, not just in terms of the Electoral College, but the popular vote. The fact that the popular vote went to a Republican for the first time in 20 years, only the second time in almost 40 years. And not only that, but simply the fact that the American people said, as a huge part of that, we want, number one, our tax dollars to stop flowing to fund these wars. And number two, we want a de-escalation. To watch the Biden administration and the people who are pulling these strings ramp us up to a level that we have not seen in the entirety of this 3-year war is truly staggering. Again, knowing there's only 60 days, a lot can happen in those 60 days and have not only incredible consequences, but consequences we can't necessarily walk back.
Well, the good news is, of course, is you now see Donald Trump at his best. I mean, he ran as the peace candidate, and he is, after all, a deal maker. That's what he does. He came from the world of business, not the world of politics. So in order to avert World War III and more killing and more death, he's reached out to both President Zelensky and to Vladimir Putin and has called both of them to meet with them, to hit with him, to see if we can't resolve this immediately. I think most people understand that he can resolve this war, and he can reverse the policies of this administration in the Middle East, where we handed $190 billion to the rogue regime in Iran, as if we didn't know that they were going to use that to finance terrorism and to restart their nuclear weapons development program. If we return to the sanctions, the very harsh sanctions that Trump had on Iran, we had them on the verge of bankruptcy. Even their Chinese patrons would not buy oil from them. The sanctions were so rough. But when you give them $190 billion in unfrozen assets, what do you expect but an attack on Israel? In both of these regions. Donald Trump can bring peace. I think he can do it pretty quickly, but this administration seems intent on doing as much damage as they possibly can until he gets there.
Last question for you. What do you think happens over the next couple of days? I mean, obviously, this is a huge provocation to see again. These are U.S.-made, U.S.-supplied missiles likely being fired by a U.S. military of some kind into Russia. Does Trump get back on the phone with Putin? Does he get back on the phone with Zelensky? Does he have to now step in when you have Biden, who, again, is completely feckless? He has been for a long time. But not only that, he's completely lost. He's not running the country. He's certainly not running whatever's happening in terms of the military. Does Trump step in at this point and try to negotiate an end now before he even takes office?
I think that by asking them both to meet with him, that's exactly what he's doing. He's talking to both of them in the hopes that he can ratchet down the pressures. But look, let's recognize that Putin has his own political pressures at home. And if Russia is attacked, he's going to have no choice but to respond. Now we're off into a conflagration. He's made it very clear with the change in his own policy that if his country is attacked by a non-NATO nation, but using NATO weapons supplied by the United States, that he's going to retaliate. But we are this close. I have huge confidence in the president, however, to lessen the tensions, bring these leaders together, and forge a peace. If he has to do it before he's sworn in as president, I think he will do that. He's clearly trying to do it even as we speak.
Roger Stone, thanks so much for your time and your insight.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?